What if you could produce a remarkable amount of food without a huge backyard? Welcome to Savage Harvest and Heal, where we turn small spaces into practical food systems. A 12 by 12 foot corner gives you only 144 square feet of ground, yet with intelligent planning, that small footprint can function like a much larger food system. The secret is not squeezing plants together until the garden becomes overcrowded. The secret is learning how to use space in multiple dimensions, how to sequence crops through the seasons, how to recycle water and nutrients, and how to design every square foot around production, access, and biological health. A quarter acre contains 10,890 square feet, so claiming that 144 square feet can outperform an entire quarter acre requires an important explanation. You are not literally creating more soil area than the larger property. You are creating greater production intensity per unit of ground. A conventional quarter-acre garden may contain lawns, ornamental plants, wide paths, unused corners, storage areas, and poorly planned spaces. A carefully designed 12 by 12 system can devote a much higher percentage of its footprint to productive plants, while also using vertical space, succession planting, and repeated harvests. That is the real lesson. Productivity depends on design, not acreage alone. Start by changing the way you measure a garden. Most people calculate productivity horizontally, asking how many plants can fit across the ground. Intensive food production requires a three-dimensional calculation. Ground-level crops can occupy the soil surface, while climbing beans, cucumbers, peas, and supported tomatoes use vertical structures. Herbs can occupy borders. Fast-growing greens can fill temporary spaces between slower crops. Shade-tolerant crops can sometimes occupy the lower layer beneath taller plants, provided light levels remain adequate. This creates several productive layers without requiring additional ground. However, vertical gardening is not simply about adding trellises everywhere. Every vertical crop creates weight, shade, and maintenance requirements. A mature cucumber vine carrying wet foliage can place considerable load on a support. An indeterminate tomato can become top-heavy and collapse a weak cage. A vigorous climbing bean can pull against a lightweight fence. Build trellises according to the mature crop, not according to the tiny seedling you see at planting time. Use structural posts, strong wire, netting, or purpose-built supports where appropriate, and inspect them before the crop reaches maximum weight. The next principle is reachability. High-density gardening fails when the gardener cannot comfortably access the plants. If you make beds too wide, you will eventually step into them, compacting the soil and damaging roots. If paths are too narrow, harvesting becomes frustrating. If a trellis blocks access to a bed, pruning and disease inspection become difficult. A productive garden should therefore be designed around human movement before it is filled with plants. Decide where your feet, tools, watering equipment, harvest containers, and wheelbarrow will travel, then place growing beds around those movement patterns. This is why pathways are productive infrastructure even though they do not grow food. They protect the growing medium from repeated foot traffic, provide access for harvesting, and create a maintenance corridor for irrigation and repairs. The pathway material should match your climate and drainage conditions. Wood chips, gravel, pavers, or other stable surfaces can work when installed correctly. Avoid creating low spots where rainwater collects against raised beds. A pathway that remains muddy encourages people to walk across planting areas, defeating the purpose of separating production space from traffic. Before planting, study sunlight carefully. Most fruiting vegetables require substantial direct light, while many leafy crops can tolerate partial shade. In a compact garden, a small change in orientation can determine whether a tomato receives enough sunlight or casts excessive shade over lettuce. Observe the site during morning, midday, and afternoon. Consider seasonal changes as well, because the sun's angle shifts throughout the year. Tall structures should generally be positioned so they do not unnecessarily block the most valuable light from shorter crops. Your garden should be designed around the sun, not simply around the shape of the available corner. Then, investigate the soil beneath the growing area. Raised beds are useful because they allow you to control the growing medium, but they are not a substitute for understanding drainage and the existing ground. Compacted soil can restrict drainage and root development. Poorly drained ground can create oxygen-starved conditions around roots. Extremely sandy soil may lose water rapidly. Heavy clay may hold water excessively while becoming hard when dry. A laboratory soil test can reveal pH, organic matter, phosphorus, potassium, and other characteristics that cannot be diagnosed reliably by appearance alone. Soil pH deserves special attention because it influences nutrient availability. A plant can have plenty of the nutrient present in the soil and still struggle if chemical conditions limit its availability. Instead of automatically adding lime, sulfur, fertilizer, or homemade amendments, test first. If correction is necessary, apply the appropriate material at a measured rate based on soil conditions. Overcorrection creates a new problem that may be harder to fix than the original one. Productive gardening begins with measurement rather than guessing. For raised beds, focus on physical structure as much as fertility. Roots require water, nutrients, and oxygen simultaneously. A good growing medium contains pores that hold water and larger spaces that allow air movement. Mature compost can contribute organic matter and biological activity, while mineral soil provides structural stability. Avoid treating compost as a complete fertilizer or assuming that more organic matter is always better. Excessive or immature organic material can create nutrient imbalances, high salt levels, unstable structure, or other problems. Build soil gradually and observe how it behaves after irrigation and rainfall. The strongest intensive gardens also plan water before planting. Water demand increases rapidly when plant density increases, especially during hot weather. Hand watering may work for a few containers, but a dense 12 by 12 system can become difficult to manage consistently with a hose alone. Drip irrigation or carefully designed low-volume irrigation can deliver water near the root zone while reducing unnecessary wetting of foliage in surrounding paths. Divide irrigation into zones when crops have significantly different moisture requirements. A lettuce bed and a mature tomato bed should not automatically receive identical irrigation schedules. Rainwater harvesting can further improve water efficiency where appropriate and permitted. A roof gutter can direct clean runoff into a covered storage barrel, but the system needs screening, overflow management, and regular inspection. Storage should be protected from debris, mosquitoes, algae growth, and accidental contamination. Never allow overflow to undermine foundations or saturate an area that already drains poorly. The value of a rain barrel is not merely the amount of water stored, its value comes from making captured water available when crops need it. Automation becomes especially useful once irrigation is standardized. A timer can operate valves or pumps, but a timer alone does not know whether the soil is already saturated. A soil moisture sensor can provide additional information and help prevent unnecessary irrigation. Sensor placement is critical. Do not put the sensor directly beside an emitter where it receives concentrated water and falsely represents the whole bed. Place it within the active root zone at a representative location. For a large or variable bed, more than one measurement point may be justified. The most effective automated system combines several signals. Soil moisture tells you about the root environment. Rainfall tells you what water has recently entered the system. Weather conditions influence evaporation. Crop stage influences demand. Irrigation history shows what you have already supplied. A controller can use these inputs to reduce waste, but the gardener still needs to inspect the plants. Automation should remove repetitive decisions, not remove biological observation. A disconnected tube, clogged emitter, failed sensor, or broken valve can turn a sophisticated system into a dry garden very quickly. Now consider crop selection. Small spaces should be filled with crops that justify the area they occupy. Prioritize vegetables and herbs that your household regularly consumes, crops that produce repeatedly, and crops that are expensive or inconvenient to purchase. Leafy greens can provide rapid turnover. Herbs can produce continuously from small areas. Climbing beans can transform vertical surfaces into productive zones. Tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, and similar crops can provide substantial harvests from carefully managed plants. Do not grow everything. Prioritize crops that provide the greatest practical value from limited space. Succession planting can multiply the productivity of the same square foot. A bed does not have to produce only one crop during an entire season. A cool season crop can occupy it early, followed by a warm season crop after temperatures rise. When the first crop finishes, remove it promptly if it is no longer productive, restore the bed if necessary, and establish the next crop. Fast-growing greens can be inserted between slower crops when their harvest timing allows. This turns time into another dimension of growing space. The key is to avoid planting according to a single annual event. Think in sequences. Ask what will occupy this bed first, what will replace it, and what will follow that crop. Consider germination time, transplant size, days to maturity, harvest duration, and the date when each crop is likely to finish. A compact garden becomes much more productive when the same soil supports several useful crops across the year, rather than remaining occupied by one crop for a short harvest window. Interplanting can also increase efficiency, but only when based on plant behavior. A shallow-rooted crop may coexist with a deeper-rooted crop, but both still compete for water and nutrients. A tall crop may provide useful shade, but too much shade reduces photosynthesis in the crop beneath it. Fast-growing radishes can occupy space between slower crops, provided their harvest occurs before crowding becomes a problem. Companion planting should therefore be treated as a design tool rather than a collection of guaranteed pest control claims. Plant spacing deserves equal attention. High density is not the same as overcrowding. Every crop has a minimum space requirement determined by its mature canopy, root system, airflow needs, and expected harvest size. If plants are placed too closely, humidity can increase inside the canopy, leaves may remain wet longer, disease pressure can rise, and harvesting becomes difficult. Use the smallest spacing that remains biologically appropriate for the variety and growing conditions. Compact cultivars can be valuable because they allow high production without requiring excessive horizontal room. Tomatoes illustrate this principle especially well. Indeterminate varieties can continue growing and producing when adequately supported, but they need a strong vertical framework and regular management. Determinate varieties have a different growth pattern and may require different support strategies. Avoid allowing foliage to become an impenetrable wall. Maintain adequate airflow, remove damaged or diseased leaves, secure stems appropriately, and monitor for signs of nutrient stress, pests, or fungal disease. The goal is a productive canopy that captures light without becoming a stagnant, humid environment. Leafy greens provide a different opportunity because their harvest can be staggered. Rather than planting a huge number of heads at once, sow smaller quantities repeatedly. Harvest outer leaves from suitable varieties while leaving the growing point intact when appropriate. This can extend the useful life of the crop. Kale and other cut-and-come-again greens can provide repeated harvests, while lettuce can be selected and managed according to whether you want individual heads or continuous leaf production. Small gardens benefit enormously from crops that can be harvested progressively. Fertility management should follow the same principle of precision. Plants remove nutrients as they grow, but the solution is not to pour fertilizer onto every bed on a fixed schedule. Excess nitrogen can produce lush vegetative growth at the expense of fruiting in some crops and may increase susceptibility to certain pests or diseases. Excess phosphorus can accumulate in soil and contribute to environmental problems. Potassium is essential for many physiological processes, but more is not automatically better. Organic inputs can be extremely valuable when used correctly. Mature compost improves structure and contributes nutrients, but its nutrient concentration varies. Well-composted manure can contribute organic matter and fertility, but fresh manure should not be treated as an immediate vegetable bed fertilizer. Kitchen scraps can become valuable compost feedstock when balanced with appropriate carbon-rich materials. The objective is to return nutrients to the system in stable forms, rather than creating nutrient spikes or introducing immature material around food crops. Mulch is another low-tech technology. A suitable organic mulch can reduce evaporation, moderate soil temperature, suppress weed emergence, and protect the soil surface from heavy rainfall. Apply it at a useful depth and keep it away from direct contact with plant stems. Too little mulch may provide minimal benefit, while excessive depth can keep surfaces overly wet or create shelter for pests. Inspect under the mulch periodically. Soil should smell earthy rather than sour, and the surface should remain biologically active without becoming permanently waterlogged. Pest control should begin with identification. Do not see a damaged leaf and immediately reach for a pesticide. Inspect the underside of leaves, growing points, stems, flowers, and fruit. Look for insects, eggs, feeding marks, webbing, slime trails, or disease lesions. Identify whether the problem is an insect, pathogen, environmental stress, nutrient imbalance, or physical damage. Different causes require different responses. Misdiagnosis wastes money and can eliminate beneficial organisms that naturally suppress pests. Disease prevention also begins with design. Space plants so air can move through foliage. Avoid unnecessary overhead irrigation, particularly late in the day. Remove severely diseased material rather than allowing it to remain in the canopy. Clean tools when moving between plants if there is a reasonable risk of spreading disease. Rotate susceptible crops when practical, especially when soil-borne diseases are a recurring problem. Healthy plants are not invincible, but good cultural practices can substantially reduce the conditions that allow disease to spread. One of the most powerful tools in a high-yield garden is record keeping. Record what you planted, where you planted it, when you planted it, how much you harvested, when pests appeared, how much irrigation was used, and which varieties performed best. Over several seasons, these records become a customized growing database. You may discover that one bed dries faster, one crop suffers from afternoon shade, or one variety produces twice as long as another. These observations allow you to improve the system scientifically instead of relying on memory. Labor must also be included in the design. A garden that produces enormous harvests but requires exhausting daily maintenance may not be sustainable. Put frequently harvested crops near the easiest access points. Keep irrigation controls accessible. Place compost where organic waste can be moved efficiently. Design trellises so pruning and harvesting can be done safely. Standardized bed dimensions where possible. The goal is not merely maximum biological output, it is maximum useful output for the amount of human effort required. For anyone starting with a 12 by 12 space, resist the temptation to build everything at once. Begin with measurement. Map sunlight, water access, drainage, and movement. Test the soil. Draw the beds and paths. Decide which surfaces can support vertical crops. Plan irrigation before planting. Select a limited group of high-value crops, then observe the first season closely. Your first design is a prototype, not a permanent law. After the first growing cycle, evaluate every square foot. Which crop produced well? Which crop demanded too much water? Which area was difficult to reach? Which pest appeared? Which irrigation zone dried too quickly? Which trellis worked? Which variety continued producing? Which pathway became muddy? Use those answers to redesign the next cycle. Continuous improvement is one of the greatest advantages of intensive gardening because a small system can be changed quickly. The concept of a small garden outperforming a much larger property becomes clearer when you stop comparing raw acreage and start comparing efficiency. A large property may have enormous potential, but poor organization. A compact garden can concentrate sunlight, water, fertile soil, vertical supports, and human attention exactly where they produce the greatest return. That concentration is what makes intensive food production powerful. But remember that intensity has limits. You cannot eliminate the biological requirements of plants by packing more of them into the same space. Roots still require oxygen, leaves still require light, fruits still require nutrients, soil still needs protection. Water still has to reach the root zone. Excessive density can reverse the benefits by increasing disease, competition, and maintenance. The target is optimized density, not maximum density. The most useful question is therefore not how many plants can I fit here. Ask instead, how much food can this space sustainably produce while remaining healthy and manageable? That question changes every decision. It encourages appropriate spacing instead of crowding, succession instead of permanent occupation, drip irrigation instead of wasteful watering, composting instead of nutrient loss, and automation instead of repetitive manual work. A 12 by 12 garden can become a miniature food production laboratory. Every element can perform more than one function. A trellis supports crops and creates vertical production. A rain barrel stores water. Compost recycles nutrients. Mulch protects soil. Paths preserve bed structure. Sensors provide data. Irrigation delivers water efficiently. Succession planting keeps beds productive across seasons. Careful crop selection turns limited space into meaningful harvests. The deeper lesson is that land productivity is as much an engineering problem as a gardening problem. You are managing sunlight, water, soil chemistry, root biology, plant architecture, time, labor, and information. When these variables are coordinated, small spaces become remarkably capable. When they are ignored, even large gardens can become inefficient, expensive, and exhausting. So, if you have a neglected corner of your backyard, do not dismiss it because it is small. Measure it, study it, test it, design it. Give every square foot a purpose. Use vertical space where the structure and crop allow it. Grow through successive seasons instead of relying on one harvest. Capture water where practical. Recycle nutrients responsibly. Automate repetitive irrigation tasks. Monitor the biological response. Record your results and improve the system every season. The objective is not to imitate someone else's garden exactly. The objective is to understand why intensive systems work and apply those principles to your own conditions. A productive 12 by 12 garden is not created by cramming vegetables into a tiny box. It is created by coordinating space, time, biology, infrastructure, and human effort so that every resource performs as much useful work as possible. That is how a small backyard corner can challenge the productivity of a much larger conventional garden. Not because square footage has somehow stopped mattering, but because intelligently managed square footage can produce repeatedly, vertically, and efficiently. Once you begin thinking in layers, seasons, root zones, irrigation zones, harvest cycles, and data, the size of your garden becomes only one part of the equation. The real advantage is control. You know where the crops are. You know where the water goes. You can inspect the soil. You can monitor moisture. You can measure harvests. You can adjust spacing. You can replace weak varieties. You can improve the compost. You can redesign the paths. Every season gives you new information, and every piece of information can make the next season more productive. That is the philosophy behind high-yield gardening. Do not add more plants. Build a better system. Use the land vertically. Protect the soil biologically. Move water intelligently. Schedule crops strategically. Observe problems early, and design the garden around the people who must maintain it. When those principles come together, even 144 square feet can become one of the most productive and useful parts of a backyard. The size of your garden does not determine the size of your harvest. What matters is how intelligently you use the space, how carefully you manage the soil, water, sunlight, and time, and how consistently you improve the system season after season. Start with the space you have, make every square foot count, and let each harvest teach you something new. If this teaching gave you a new way to look at small space gardening, make sure you subscribe to Savage Harvest and Heal for more practical strategies on high-yield gardening, smarter food production, permaculture, and sustainable backyard systems. Share this video with someone who believes they need a huge property to grow a meaningful amount of food. Until the next one, keep growing, keep learning, and keep turning every available space into something that feeds you. This is Savage Harvest and Heal, where we grow smarter, harvest more, and build healthier food systems from the ground up.